Hello, gentlemen, and welcome to another Pallavi Market Research video. Today, we are continuing off of yesterday's discussion, and we're going to go deeper. We're going to dive really deep into Henry Kissinger. Why? Well, the reality is, if you do not study Kissinger and his life closely, it is impossible to understand America's place in the world and how we got here. It's really that simple. So, who is Henry Kissinger? If you're not already aware, he served as a Secretary of State under Richard Nixon and Gerald Ford. Before serving, he was a premier academic and is considered a founding father of both nuclear strategy and game theory as fields of study. He's a key contributor, if not the visionary, behind the petrodollar, like we discussed yesterday, as he spearheaded agreements with the most influential leaders in the Middle East. He also opened up China to the entire Western world and supported the development of Singapore into what it is today. Those are the topics we're going to be covering in this video, but that is simply scratching the surface on this man and his life. Kissinger is a highly complex individual who did a profound amount of good and a profound amount of the exact opposite. So let's start and let's go back to the Middle East, because Kissinger very controversially believed that it was better for America if we maintained instability in the Middle East, as the entire region sat on an infinite amount of the world's most valuable resource, oil. He understood that countries like Afghanistan, Iraq, Iran were positioned to become very, very rich and therefore more powerful once they started tapping into these oil reserves. But luckily for Kissinger and the United States, these countries needed to use American construction companies to build the infrastructure to get to the oil in the first place. Not to mention, they also needed debt, loans, to pay for that capital investment as well. This created a lane for Kissinger to engage in anti-unification policies in the region. One of his methods for achieving this was by quietly placing contradictory leaders inside Saudi Arabia and Afghanistan. He needed to shut down Marxist uprisings in Afghanistan to ensure the Soviet Union would not engage in the region. He also empowered capitalist leaders in Saudi Arabia, which caused violent outbursts from local Wahhabists. All this allowed Kissinger to stimulate all this conflict in this region with little effort, and to therefore destabilize the Middle East's perception of who the true perpetrators were. They believed they were fighting amongst themselves, but they really were in conflict with minority groups that appeared bigger than they really were, as they had the backing of United States intelligence, arms, capital, and more. Kissinger coupled these strategies of anti-unification and controlled opposition with what he called constructive ambiguity. This refers to the deliberate use of ambiguous language on sensitive issues in order to advance some political purpose. This led to opaque policies that manipulated the leaders of the Middle East and America. To Kissinger, it was better to pretend that our attempts to modernize or unify the region were not the result of collective failure, but instead the result of a mysterious dilemma that lied beneath the surface of reality. Now, let's move on to China. Henry Kissinger's role in opening China is typically framed as one of the greatest diplomatic achievements of the 20th century. This is the case because he went to China secretly in the early days of the Cold War, a time where China had been fully isolated from the West. This was such a big deal because of the immense threat that China and the Soviet Union, both being communist states, could unify. But one could argue that Kissinger's visit alone and the story he told the Chinese leadership kept that from being possible. On top of that, Kissinger began kicking off little trade agreements between China and the United States for agriculture and textiles, as well as lifting previous trade embargoes that were set during the Korean War. Kissinger, after leaving office through the 80s, made great amounts of money through his consulting firm, which made important introductions for future trade agreements during Jimmy Carter's administration and beyond. But he was not only consulting in China, where he made major impacts. He made major impacts in Singapore as well, while protecting them from the Marxist influence in the region, which was really substantial at that time. I know I've spoken about Lee Kuan Yew and the Singapore story multiple times now, but it was actually this image of Kissinger that started me down this rabbit hole of studying Yew, as I was shocked to see an image of Kissinger crying given his reputation. There is no single man who Kissinger spoke more highly of, and it's not even close. He consistently praised his knowledge of history, the nature of and his understanding of the nature of power, and was considered him the wisest and the most intelligent man he ever met, going as far to say he was the world's greatest leader in the 20th century post World War period. I mean, if you can you find another picture of Xi Jinping smiling that genuinely? Kissinger's influence, his strategic choices continue to influence the world today and will likely continue to do so for the next 100, maybe even 200 years. This is a man who understood risk, strategy, history, storytelling at a level that is really hard to comprehend. Though he did make some undeniably controversial decisions, this is a man who achieved two extremely important things. He kept America safe while expanding our relative power in the world, securing our position as the global hegemon. A challenging and arguably a contradictory goal that he set out to achieve and ultimately did. Thank you guys for listening. I will see you all tomorrow.